So here I have a 3/8 flute. It's a 3/8 flute, deep fluted bowl gouge. Again, it's got an asymmetric grind on it. So it's got a very shorter right wing and a longer swept back left wing. And that just helps for a variety of reasons. But the key thing is that the wings are not straight. They have a convex curve. And that just helps get a better, more stable shaving, I find, and takes out more wood more quickly. So yeah, we'll get started hollowing. And then I'm only going to do so much. And then I have the dividers from before set for the internal diameter. And I know that the chuck jaws are only maybe an 1/8 quarter inch thicker past that. So then I can go that far past that and have a mortise that I know will work.
Sorry if I missed it. What tool are you using?
I'm using a 3/8 flute bowl gouge. It's got an asymmetric grind. So I'm coming in. There's 3 ways that the tool can move here. We have up and down, left and right, and then rotationally. When I'm starting my cuts, I have it completely perpendicular to the lathe bed and the tool rest, so at 90 degrees to each other. And I have the flute also at a 90, to where I can't see a single bit of this flute right now. A thing to note here is that I'm going to ease the tool in, and I'm also going to have support behind the tool to also help with it wanting to skate back, which is with an asymmetric grind, it wants to skate back a little bit more than a regular grind where the wings are even. It wants to ride up the surface, or the wood wants to ride up your cutting edge. And obviously, since the wood's fixed, it's going to want to push your tool back. So that's what happens when you have those little skate backs. Is you have one of the 2 things or both, right? It's at an angle upward and up, rotated out. So 90 degrees both ways, enter, and then I can drop the handle and move forward. Drop the handle, open the flute, and move forward. Now I can pretty well eyeball, not needing the dividers, where those jaws are on the other side, and I can go in straight on that. I can also check that with the dividers. So these are set a little bit, these are set for the internals, so I want a little bit more than that I can grip on, and then I'm going to put a shoulder in there. And that's looking pretty good. One thing to note is because these, the wings are so far down, so these wings are way higher than the side ones, right? I'm only going to be gripping pretty much on solid wood in 2 places, but it should be enough because it's a small piece. I'm going to grab a 3/4 inch, or maybe this is an inch. This is an inch, maybe 1.5 inches, honestly. I'm not sure. Wide tool. It's a scraper, square and scraper. So the rest has to come up in order for the top of the tool to be pitched down when I'm working at center. Always with scrapers, you want the tool to be pitched down. So you want the end of your handle to be higher than the cutting edge. Let me just leave this here. What I did there is I gave it a slight dovetail inward, so to the left, and then I also took the edge and sweeped it back to the right so that I can get into that corner nice. If you have your dovetail like this, but then you have an angle in here or like a hump like this, your chuck jaws are not going to be able to get all the way into the corner, and you're not going to have as secure of a grip. I can go down a little bit more and try and get into some of this wood right here, which I might do. I think I will. Yeah, I'll try and do that. So I'll go a little bit further to try and have some wood that I can play with, because I want to be able to have wood on all sides, of the jaws for a secure grip, and that way I can pivot it a little bit to try and get these wings more in line with each other. And the rest is up right now. I need to drop that back down. Switching back to the square and scraper. Rest has to come up again. It doesn't need to be dramatic, but you just want to make sure it's there. Talking about that downward pitch of the scraper. You don't need to have your tool way up right here, but you want to have it a little bit more than 90. Or less than 90, sorry. So now in here I have barely any wood on this side, but that should be good. Should be good enough. Where did I put my key? I'll close those jaws right down and they'll seat over that. Another thing is that because these jaws are so short, I'm not going to be able to reach all the way in there, which isn't ideal. But it is going to work, and I've done many bowls like this way before. And that's also going to help me to get these top wings aligned. Because if I press here, it's going to line up on either end. This straight across right here is going to seat up against the top of the jaws. And then I want to check the sides and see what the alignment's looking like there. And I come around, it's looking pretty good, it's looking okay. And we're still off true right here, but our alignment's better. So I'm gonna end up truing that up. And that doesn't really matter. I'm not putting a ton of pressure here, just enough. It is pretty eccentric. I am gonna smooth up the bottom and then with some light cuts and then bring up the tail center. Just because there's no safety towards you guys. Although it wouldn't go flying off that direction if something did go wrong. And that's all I need right now, so I can bring the tail center up for that support. And I don't need much, just a little pressure and that's good. And the rest was a fraction low. So now it's out of true and I can see a double image. I want to get rid of that and then take this up until I'm happy with the size of the bowl in relation to the wings that come down, the smaller wings. Again, I'm just sweeping the tool through, using just to the left of the nose. And I'm going to stop before I go too far off the top. And in this cut here, instead of pivoting my hips to the right, I'm dropping my hips back and using that wing as a sort of scraping pull cut to remove material. And that's looking pretty cool. I like how high these lower wings are in relation to the base. So I'm going to go with that. And this is a pretty cool bowl. I actually like how elongated it is. And I'm going to do something pretty cool at the foot. It looks like there is a small split coming in. We did get rid of the pith, which was my worry at the beginning. At the bottom, this was angled and there was still some of the pith, but I've managed to get rid of that, which is always great. And there's no splits except for one at the bottom, so I am going to actually come in and try and remove that one. It doesn't seem like it goes very deep though. Stop and check, and the split's gone. Perfect. So here I'm just going to use my dividers again and see how we're looking on the foot. I can tell that that's a bit big now, so I'll remark that. It's a bit harder to do because of the tailstock that's in the way. And coming here, this entry cut is crucial. A lot of people will have a catch here or have the tool escape back because they'll try and treat it like it's a bull gouge when they are entering in the middle. So again, there's 3 points that the tool can be rotating, there can be moving up, down, left, right, and then rotation. So here, the rotation is the same. It's completely 90, and I can't see any of the flute. And what I'm going to do is use the left edge, and I'm going to have the tool raised up and then pivot that edge down. And then as I pivot that edge down, it'll get a crisp corner in the end. And it's not going to want to ride up the edge of the tool if I'm using the left wing. It wants to roll up the edge of the tool when you're coming in at a 90 with it open. Then it has room to roll up the right wing and push the tool out of the way. If I'm just coming in pivoting down with the left wing, it's not going to do that. Unless there's a lot of pressure going in there because you don't have a sharp tool. Then it will. So coming in right on that line, and then usually for smaller details, I'll pick up a 3/8 spindle gouge, and even smaller gouge to try and get right in there and do what I want to do. And I'm just shear scraping out of the corner. So as I come out of the corner, I open the gouge slightly. It's still dropped down. Or it's not dropped down. I'm going to open the gouge and then slowly drop it down as I pull back to get a shear angle or a 45-degree angle between the cutting edge and the surface you're working. And if you have a sharp tool, it should give you a nice surface, especially on this mesquite, which is very forgiving wood. So get a nice shear scrape out of there, and you can feel this, that it feels smooth. I don't feel any tear out, nothing like that. But I can stop and check, of course. And yeah, there's nothing torn out on the end grain here. It's very smooth as opposed to up here. Up here there is tear out because I wasn't worried about getting a nice surface. I was just worried about roughing it out. And I want to do something interesting with this foot to match the sort of outflowingness of this bowl. It's not really an outflowing bowl, but to match the proportions of like the length of the top wings to the side wings, I want to do an outflowing foot. So I'll come in and use the left wing and just squeeze that through with the tool dropped to right above my hip. And I can drop this more and get a more shear angle and get a cleaner scrape. and squeezing it around that to make this little cove for the foot. And I like the way that's looking. It's a little bit, the cove's a little bit flat. I wish I had more foot to work with, which I could make more foot, but then we'd reduce the rest of the bowl. I think that's good for now. And of course I want enough to grip with the jaws, which that's about 1/8 of an inch right now, maybe a little less, and that should be fine. I'm going to make it a little bit deeper when I go to finish the outside of the shaping, which is right now. I'll come back to a 1/2 inch spindle gouge. I could probably increase the revs now a little bit more. Now that it's in balance, I could have done that a lot sooner. It's at 1500. And if you noticed before, I had a little bit of piece still from the top on the top of one of the wings, or both the wings, that I needed to come back and get from the other side. And my eyes aren't looking at where the tool's cutting at the bottom. I'm looking at the upper horizon, looking how the shape's developing and looking where my tool's cutting at.
On that upper part, why did you come in from the top side?
I came in from the top side in order to avoid breaking out the tops of the wings as we come through. Since this is cross grain, the fibers up here is running across like this. So if we put any pressure this way, they're going to want to shear off. It's the same reason that we don't go large diameter to small diameter when we're turning something cross grain like this. Of course, I'm breaking that rule by doing this right now in order to avoid completely tearing off the tops of the wings. Depending on the wood that you'll have, some woods you can go against the grain and directly into the end grain fiber and get a clean cut. Mesquite is kind of one of them. It works great. I love working it, and it's very nice to me. So that's why it's easy. And I have largely a clean cut coming in from the top, even though it's technically a downhill cut. Now, because the tail center's in the way and I don't really want to get rid of its support because there's not much gripping it from the mortise, I probably could. But again, I don't want to hurt you lovely people out there. So what I'm going to do, usually I would take a beautiful outside cut, which you're going to see on that bowl if I can speed this up, which I will. I'm going to use my shear scraping tool to refine the outside. And that is the scraper that I have taken to the grinder, and it has a slight radius here, a pretty good radius on here, because I use it for the insides of bowls and dishes and things like that. I've been doing a lot of pasta dishes recently. But the key thing to note is that this side here, I've taken and I've rounded it over, so that even if you have catches on your tool rest, it's not going to want to stick anywhere, and it's going to slide over those little nicks in the tool rest super easily. Whereas if you have a sharp edge, it wants to catch a little bit more, and you can't get as smooth of a flow through there. Now this has a fresh burr on it, so I don't need to go take it to the grinder and have a burr. What I'm not going to do is use this flat to refine the outside right now because there's a lot of space in here. It's largely like a skew chisel, which I know that was a very intimidating thing to say, but I don't know if you can see that very well, but there's a little bit of dust. You can see where the dust is coming off and what portion of the edge I'm using. I'm tilting this tool up, so I'm getting around to 45, a little bit more than that if I need to, and shear scraping to get the best possible surface. So I'm using the lower portion of the edge when I have this tilted up. The other key thing to note here is I'm using minimal pressure against the wood, barely any at all. It's largely like the pull cut that I talked about at the beginning to rough it out. I'm just squeezing this, just lightly going through it. and the tool is on a predetermined path. And again, I'm watching the upper horizon to see how the shape develops. And there's a little bit of tear out in one spot that was a low spot that I haven't hit with the tool yet. But other than that, it's a beautiful surface, apart from the bark that's gone. And that tear out's gone. Yeah, it's gone. Perfect. What I can do, oh, I don't, tail center wasn't even doing anything. That's awesome. What I can do to get rid of this nub is I can take this off right now and use a chisel and then a little bit of sandpaper on a drill. I'm going to make this a little bit more easier to do that by coming in, making it itself a dovetail, and that way I can pop it off a little bit easier. Usually I try to get to the hole, the outside of the bowl, and not use the tail center so that I can avoid having to do that because it's just an extra step. And the bottom of this foot, largely like the top and the bottom, is face grain. So the whole length of the grain runs right across. I'm not really bumping into any end grain fibers until I start to make that either convex or concave. Since it's a flat surface right now, it scrapes really well. Even on woods that scrape horribly like fir, you can still get a clean scrape on the face grain if you have a sharp tool and you know what's going on. Sometimes that's not the case, but most of the time that's how it is. What I did right there is I came in and had the tool at 90 going into the corner and then dropped it a little bit and used the wing to just shear scrape out. And I made that a concave surface so that it sits on the outside. And that's enough for this outside of the bowl. That's done. Of course, I would sand it, but because I have no tear out, the sanding would take a minute, 30 seconds. It really takes no time at all. And if I was going to sand this, a thing to note, sanding these natural edge bowls is super awful. On the outside, it's a little bit easier because you can have, I didn't bring it, but if you have a rubber pad, you can put the sandpaper on there, or you can use your drill attachment. You just got to know in relation to how the wings are coming down, which part of the pad to use. So if I'm using a drill to sand this, say my hand is the drill and it's spinning to the left or to the right, and this is moving down, I want to use this half of the drill, not the top side, or else it's going to grab it and, you know, not going to treat you very well. So yeah, that's done, and I'm going to flip that around. And this just came off. I didn't even notice. It sheared off. And that's the thing. So because this is cross grain, if you put a little bit of pressure in there, and some people do this while the lathe is running, you can turn it off and then just put a little bit of pressure, and it'll shear the grain across it. Which is not what I was meaning to do, but I think that's what ended up happening. Lovely little long bowl. Okay, the next step, I can do the bottom, but I'll do that later. And this is probably going to leave teeth marks. I didn't get exactly on my line like I should have. And I can go back and jam chuck those, but for this demonstration, it's going to be fine. And remove those teeth. So again, I'm not gripping this very hard. The jaws seat up into the corner at the top of the foot there, And I'm just putting a little bit of pressure, and that's all I need. Because this bowl is so small, usually I'll use my 1/4-inch drill to drill a depth hole, in which I'll make a little starter hole, a little divot, and then use this and just plunge it into how far I want to go. It's so small that I don't need that. I'll just use the bowl gouge. And check where I'm at. I'm a little bit too low. That's another thing to note. When you're at 90, you want to be cutting at center or a little bit above, never below. You have a little bit of playroom to where you're cutting at center and then above, but never below. And I never go all the way around with my gouge. I'm not that great at it, and I can never get a really perfect curve. And we're getting pretty thin here. I mean, that's a decent thickness. I wish I brought my calipers. I meant to, but it seems like that's a little bit over 1/4 of an inch. Getting down to 1/8 of an inch or 3/16 of an inch, it's going to start screaming at me, but I'm going to go for it. And right now I have it tapered. So it's thinner right at the top and then slowly getting thicker at the bark. With these natural edge bowls and the live edge bowls, you have a little bit of excuse to not make it as thin as you want to or are capable to, because you can have the excuse that you want to leave more of the natural edge to be seen. So you can totally use that excuse if you want, and it's valid. I mean, that's the truth, right? The thinner you make it, the less of the edge you see. And if you're working wood where you're trying to keep the bark on there, you also don't want it to go as thin because it's, again, more inclined to break off. And I think I'm going to stop there. I heard it screaming at me. On other bowls, like roughed out bowls and regular bowls, I could use my fingers to come around the backside and support this to try and help equalize the pressure and get less chatter. Because it's a natural edge, I don't have that option. What I can do is maybe try a heavier tool to try and get some less vibration. But specifically on this piece, the wings right here are way higher than their lowest part. The highs and the lows are way far apart. So it's going to be more inclined to vibrate, but that's still good. That's about 1/4 of an inch, a little more. Totally happy with that. So now I put the bowl gouge away, even though I could go all the way around with it, and I grab a bowl scraper. Especially with this mesquite that scrapes so well, I would love to take advantage of that. So the tool rest comes up, so I'm pitched down. And in order to take advantage of the grain here, I'm going to work my way. I'm going to start coming in. So this is concave right now, a little bit concave. In order to work the face grain and try and avoid the end grain as much as possible, I want to work from the high spots to the low spots. So like that. And I could take this tool and come in like this and take little nibbles all the way in. But what I like to do is start from the middle. So I come in, have the tool pitch down, and I pivot my edge up through center and pull out. And so I had that line originally from where I stopped my cuts with the bowl gouge. Once I reach that line, I tend to stop and feel how I'm going. What I want to have is a lump that I can take out instead of a really deep spot going super far in, and that way I can control the depth and the smoothness of the curve. What I'm after is a smooth flowing curve that wraps all the way through the bowl. Right now there's a big old dome. And I obviously have enough thickness to get rid of that, so I'm going to. And that's the nice thing about the scraper is you have a little bit more leniency with that. If I was using, me specifically, if I was using a bottom feeder gouge, so a traditionally ground gouge, I would not be able to get a nice smooth curve. And I respect those who use that tool because I've never been able to figure it out. Of course, I haven't tried very much because this works great for me, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Yeah, with a few extra cuts, that's perfect. There is a little bit of torn grain because I was pushing into the wood and trying to be aggressive and remove material. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back, and I still have the burr on there. I can feel it. So I'm going to come back and use just a light touch and just barely go over the spots, just sweeping the edge through. And that's the hardest part to get right, especially with the scraper, is coming off that face grain and coming up into the end grain right here. And there's a little bit of fuzzy grain in there. What I can do is I can drop the rest and shear scrape that, or I can try and come back with my bowl gouge. But again, I already have a curve that's nice and smooth, so I don't want to do that. Of course, you can sand your way out of that as well, but that takes more time. So I'm going to come back and using the lower portion of the edge, just move through that area. Now I can feel that this tool isn't really wanting to cut. So I'm feeling a burr in certain areas, but what can happen is you can overuse a part of the tool, or you can miss it when you're on the grinder. You can miss a portion of the edge. And when I'm using this scraper, it's not just one part of the edge that's doing the work. The point gets transferred along the edge. So if there's one part of your scraper that's sharp, you're going to get a nice cut there. And if there's a part that isn't, you're not going to get a nice cut through there. But this is an extremely sandable surface still, even with this scraper not wanting to cut and wanting me to put pressure in. It's still pretty lovely because it's mesquite, and I could sand my way out of that easily, easily. Of course, I'm not going to because then we'd all be dying. But yeah, that's a little natural edge bowl, and I'm done with that. I'm happy with that, honestly. Seems pretty cute. So yeah, there she is. Little bowl. Little bowl. I'd come back and with some pliers take I actually brought some, and try and remove some of this bark like that. There isn't much on here, so this is what I would do, is just kind of pry some of this off. And then I'd come back with like maybe 240 grit or maybe 120 if there's still some bark that's being stubborn. And I'd hit this with your drill. And what you can do is you can put this back on the lathe and then lock the spindle and then move through each part of the edge. But again, that's sanding and that makes dust, and that's not what we want right now. And the blank that I was originally going to bring did not have the bark on it, so we wouldn't have this problem. But
You want to hold that up to this camera?
Which camera? This one?
Yeah. There you go.
That's our little foot right there. We have a nub on the bottom, and then the foot is a little bit wonky. It's a little bit fat up top for the jaws to grab, but because I knew that I was going to re-jam chuck this anyway, I left that a little bit thick, just for some security. But I'm going to go back, and you can jam chuck that, and I'll finish off the foot and remove the teeth marks as well, because I didn't get that diameter perfect. So that's the little bowl. Cute. And how long? How are we looking on time?
We're right at 1 hour. So
Right at 1 hour. That's pretty
Yeah.
good. That's not bad.
I don't know if you want to do a whole thing, but if you want to just maybe go over
Rough
a
out?
few of your steps and like some key things that might be good takeaways type of thing,
For the natural edge bowl, or are you talking
or for like the next one if you want.
the next one? Do you want to do that? Okay.
Yeah,
Let's do
if
it.
you're up for it.
I'm totally up for it. This is another piece. Do you have a screw chuck or a woodworm screw? in a drill?
Sure.
Sure.
You want a,
I can put it between centers, actually.
do you want a like a spike plate or something?
I've honestly never
Okay,
used one.
then no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Sweet. And I have a designated faceplate, or not faceplate, screw chuck that I use, a Vic Mark 3-in-1. But a woodworm screw also works great. So when I'm roughing out bowls or going to finish turn a blank, I do it on the screw chuck. And usually I'll nip the corners off to give myself a little bit more, a little bit better, an easier time roughing down on the lathe. But do you have a drill? Yes, perfect. And then usually, a lot of people don't trust woodworm screws or screw chucks. I trust them more than faceplates, depending on the blank and depending on what I'm turning. Screw chucks hold incredibly well. Thank you. And you guys want to check this out? You want to pass this around? Feel it
Yeah,
up?
and actually, before you get started on that, Dane, would you want to hold up some of the samples you brought?
Oh yeah, I brought a
And the
million
large?
of my natural edge bowls. I turn a lot of, when I'm turning natural edge stuff, I don't like to turn big natural edge things, mostly because there we go.
There you go.
Mostly because the vibration gets a little bit bad and it gets harder to balance and things like that. But I have a million little pieces that I brought, some of my favorites, and some of ones that, this is my all-time favorite thing that I've ever made right here, is this little natural edge bowl. I'll put these ones aside. Now people tend to get, so this piece is my magnum opus of natural edge bowls. And I actually do not like this piece. I am not a fan of this piece whatsoever.
Why is
It's
that?
beautiful, but it took me, I set out to make this. Usually takes me about an hour, hour and a half to turn something this big if I'm fully focused and have everything ready. And depending on the wood, of course. If the wood's working nice and not dulling my tools, that's what it takes. This took me 6 hours. And it was a battle from the very start. I could only spin it at 400 RPMs the whole time because I didn't get this top part and this lower wing in balance because I wanted to keep this, it wasn't really an intrusion. If you can imagine, this was the trunk of the tree. So this is where the roots came out of. And so it was a little bit more flared. But there's this really cool fissure here that I wanted to keep. And in doing that, I was incredibly ambitious. And it was going really well until I got to the hollowing. And that's when I realized there were little splits on the end grain here that I hadn't seen. So when I went to take it thin, a chunk flew out. Thankfully, it was only one chunk that flew out, and I was able to get the rest of the bowl turned to a pretty nice thickness. The other thing that I didn't take into consideration was I didn't have a scraper big enough or heavy enough to get down into the bottom like I usually like to do. And on top of that, I couldn't get my gouge all the way around, even with a 55 or a 60-degree bevel on there, because I didn't have the tool rest that could get even anywhere near close to being in there. I ended up somehow doing it, and I had to sand quite a bit so you can feel the difference in the rings here because I sanded so aggressively that it was it removed the softer grain before the harder one, so the earlier in the season grain. But it's here, and it's my bowl, and I keep it to remind myself of how awful it is, but I still got, like, how awful the experience was, but I still got something beautiful out of it.
What is that?
This is acacia. So I believe it's willow acacia.
Looks like acacia.
Yeah. And in these little bowls, this is my favorite little bowl ever. Which,
Here, I'll have you do this one again.
yeah. This bowl is, this tree came from my backyard where I used to live in Northern California. And it's Russian olive. And it's not really a tree, it's more of a spiky shrub than a tree. But it's beautiful wood. And the grain is very even. And so it creates these beautiful concentric rings that run throughout the piece when you do a natural edge like this. And people tend to dismiss smaller items and smaller smaller turnings, but I find them to be way harder to pull off because your tolerances are way tighter. So if you're wanting to make it very thin, you don't have the tolerance or the wood to have a mess up where you went a little bit too deep and things like that. So turning an incredibly detailed piece that's really small, especially with these longer wings, and the bark stayed on, and I don't use it that much, so I decided to leave the bark on. Making these smaller pieces is harder, in my opinion, and it's great to practice your skills, and then you don't waste big pieces of wood like this that end up in tragedy and make you hate wood turning. If you have a terrible catch on a small piece, it's not the end of the world because you can get a million other small pieces.
Well, yeah, look at that piece you just turned. Like, I think that was a branch. So, I mean, you could have turned 20 out of that branch, you know?
Yeah, and these
if
little
you
things,
cut them for that.
these beautiful ones are these beautiful little plates like this. Of course, it looks rugged, and it is, but when it gets cleaned up with the bark and sanded, it turns into a beautiful bowl. And what's cool about these little branch bowls like this is they're great for little keys or things like that, and they look good on an office desk. So they tend to sell fairly well at craft fairs and things like that. In fact, a lot of my natural edge pieces sell way faster than any sort of piece that has no natural edge or anything like that. So, yeah.
Those are awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What was the wood on the other two?
So these are aspen. These are Quaking aspen. Yeah. And this was at a time where I didn't have much wood. There wasn't much wood around. I couldn't find or get much wood, so I just used what I had. And they're pretty. They aren't very utilitarian, but they are very pretty. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. And right, were we going to start turning the outside of a bowl real quick?
Yeah, let's do the outside. What do you
Okay,
say?
let's do it.
So based on the time Dane is going to start this next bowl, he's going to just do the outside and kind of walk you through the steps, and we'll see how far we get.
I just eyeball whenever I'm drilling, unless I have a divider mark in the middle. The more you eyeball things, the better you get at it, and the better you feel about yourself when you eyeball it and get it right. So, oh, that's a little bit small of a hole.
You can grab a bigger bit if you need it.
It might go on. Yeah, it'll go on. And there's a lot of screw here. Typically, I would use a spacer here. Oh, that's the other thing about the woodworm screw, is that some people will push it back. I tend to pull. I was taught to teach you to pull it forward, because that way, when you do end up getting it tight, it's going to want to pull the screw forward. So you want to seat it pulled out and then close the jaws, even though it's harder to thread on because you can't put much pressure in. Of course, I can lock the spindle. Another thing too about having a woodworm screw like this and having smaller jaws is there's not a lot of friction from the jaws, and there's not a lot of support. Usually my screw chuck, I have a bigger faceplate that gives it more support at the back, so this is probably going to want to vibrate. I'll use the tailstock anyway because there's the corners on, so there's a little bit more oscillation. I don't need to tighten that up super crazy, just enough to give it some support. So I'll rough this down with either a 1/2 inch spindle gouge again, or I'll pick up a bigger 5/8 bowl gouge. This is my 5/8 bowl gouge that I use for roughing down the outside of things, and it's more inspired by Mike Mahoney and his fingernail ground gouge. It's got a lot of steel coming in on the top of the wing here to give it more support. It's a less sharp edge, but there's more support and the edge lasts a little bit longer, if that makes any sense. So. Do we want to move the belts again, or?
What was the low?
I do not remember.
Did you
find out?
Turn it all the way down?
Yeah, yeah.
Let's see.
Oh, that's fine. That's totally fine.
Can you talk about that speed on something like this being a large blink?
RPMs, yeah. So I think, who is it? Dale Nish, I believe, has a formula for it. Formula for the RPMs, but I never memorized it, obviously, and I think that's something you should look into if you're really worried about RPMs, is Dale Nish and his formula for it. I believe Mike Mahoney uses it as well. I just spin it up until it starts to vibrate and then drop it off a hair until it stops to vibrate. And then that's what the speed that I turn it at. If it gets true and it lets me turn it as fast as I want, I typically never ever go above 2,000 RPMs, even if it's a small piece on face work. So this one is going to let me go probably to about 600 RPM. Again, it's the same with the pull cut, same with the gouge, or the same with the spindle gouge and the bowl gouge. Just sweeping the edge through the tool, or the tool's edge through the wood. And some people will come up and true the diameter beforehand. I always take the corner off first. And I'm able to work my way through a bowl, and this is pretty dry. Wet wood will work the best. Wood works best when it's wet. Shavings come off better, but even with this being dry, I can still be pretty efficient getting through this, even with the corners on. Now, if the corner's off, it might let me spin it a little bit better, or a little bit faster. Yeah, up to 700 now, a little bit above. Coming into solid timber there, it doesn't want to bounce around as much. So I'll come up, work the side. The gouge honestly didn't seem like it was cutting all that great, so I am going to go sharpen it real quick.
And this is mesquite, JP, just so you know. Dana's freehand sharpening on my wheel.
So refresh the edge. If you can look here, my gouges look pretty rough on the bottom side of the facet, but I have a good 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch at the top cutting edge that's my true bevel, and that's what I'm using to cut. So anything below that, as long as it's somewhat uniform, can be multifaceted, and I can get away with that and be fine. And here what I'm doing to try and help break through that top side of that breaking any grain is I'm squeezing it again through, coming through and then slowly sweeping it forward and back to try and give it a little bit less pressure, as little pressure as possible when coming outside. Of course, I come back from the other side as well. But in order to avoid doing, like moving my body in the tool rest and coming through, now I come back from the other top side, but I'm getting more true. Dusty stuff. So I'm pretty true, but there's still some bark on this side. What I like to do when there's bark is I can try and lever some of this off, but this stuff's the bark's pretty on here, so I'm just going to work my way through it. And that'll come off when I go to do the foot anyway. If I was doing a roughed out bowl, I do a large tenon, about 40% of the size of the bowl, especially if I was going to be coring it out. If I'm doing a finished bowl, then I don't really worry about that as much. The rule of thumb is a 1/3 in relation to the diameter, a foot the size, 1/3 of the size of the bowl for stability when it's going to be usable. If you're making an art piece, then do whatever you like. Now that it's true, I could probably run this faster as well. It's wanting to shake when I go above 1,000, which anything above 1,000 RPMs is pretty much unnecessary. People, you can turn as fast or slow as you want. I mean, you can turn a bowl at 100 RPMs. It's just going to take you all day. And I'm not worried about how pretty it looks right now. Now that I have most of that gone, I'll go switch to the 1/2-inch spindle gouge, and then I have another pair of dividers set for a bigger set of Vicmark step jaws.
Dane, will the mesquite keep the yellow ring over time?
The sapwood on the outside?
Yeah.
I haven't had a lot of pieces from a mesquite for a very long time, like age-wise. I know that all woods, if you use an oil-based finish, will patina whether you use them or not. That's what I love about oil-based finishes, like walnut oil, mineral oil, beeswax, all that good stuff, is it allows the wood to take on a patina. So this yellow ring is going to get more yellow when I put finish on it, and then over time it's going to develop a nice patina with age if it's oiled regularly or if it's used regularly, and both, of course. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers some of that.
Heck yeah.
Again, using the left point. Lines up with the right. Come in with a 1/2-inch gouge on that line. Now this is the cool part. I am going to remove the tail center so I can do an outside cut with the bull gouge that I've been wanting to show off all day that I haven't been able to. You can do this with the smaller one or the bigger one, but one of the beautiful things about this asymmetric grind is I can come around here and I can do what's called a back cut which seems incredibly awful and dangerous, but it's really not. Wood turning at its core is all about bevel support. Understanding each tool comes down to understanding the bevel and what it does and how it gives the tool support so your edge is able to cut without catching or grabbing or anything like that. Typically, I'd come in with the tool at 90, open it up slightly to about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and move forward on the bevel with my cut. Here, I can get in a little bit tighter with this foot because of the steeper bevel on the outside and take a cut up very not super far up the right wing, but a cut from the center and the right wing. And I'm going to know if I'm doing that right if the shavings are going to come and hit me in the face, because the flute is going to be pretty much directly up. And the reason I'm able to do this is because of the deep flute and the support that it has. If I tried to do this with a spindle gouge, it would be a disaster. And I'm going to pick up the 1/2 inch gouge, or the 5/8 bowl gouge, to try and show that off a bit better. And again, I wasn't worried about making a nice, beautiful cut there. I was just trying to show off that cut. And we can look at the surface that it leaves behind when you do a push cut like that, especially on this mesquite. It works incredible. And even with the push cut like that, if I have the bevel, I'm going to do one all the way around now. First, I'm going to come up and true up the top surface all the way. I'm going to come through with a pull cut and remove some of this. And now here's the cut to get a nice smooth surface going all the way through. Minimal pressure into the wood. Want to have the pressure down into the tool rest. And ease up as I come out. And that wasn't a perfect cut by any means. And there's a little bit of lumps, but that'll get it refined with some shear scraping. But the point there was to get a nice, beautiful surface. Dusty, very dusty. And the key thing to mention with this push cut here is I have it under my I hold the ferrule and have it tucked under my forearm. You can lean all the way over and have your body over it. But some people tend to grab the end of the handle, and that's perfectly fine as well. I just feel like I have more control if I have my whole arm under it. And I'm just shifting my weight and moving smoothly. Halfway through the cut, I drifted out, and I could tell where my cut was going, and I knew that I was going to go out into space. If that happens, just go out into space, and then come back and adjust and pivot in again until it starts to cut. Now I can come back and use the shear scraping, and because this isn't a natural edge piece, I can scrape normally. So I can pull the rest up and refine the outside. You know, that's why I love working woods that scrape great, because it's really easy to get a good surface. And a nice, smooth, flowing curve. Of course, I wasn't going very gently there. And that's what we want, is a nice powder and those nice little wispy shavings coming off. And I'd probably be able to get the best surface with that push cut with the gouge, but if you're not great at it, that is a totally sandable surface, easily. Not much picked out grain. There isn't any picked out grain. A little bit fuzzy, not as beautifully smooth as if I did the whole thing with the gouge. But the shape's a bit more refined and it's a bit more to my liking. There is actually some pulled out grain right here, which means it's probably at the other side a little bit.
The way the color is and the direction, it looks like that foot is a different piece of wood.
Seriously, yeah.
Right.
And this I believe is, there's two types of mesquite that grow in Arizona. There's Argentinian mesquite and there's Chilean mesquite. And this is that more blue-gray mesquite. And the other type, I'm not sure which is which, but the other type looks like this. It's very pretty. You're right. I can come back and remove this nub now. And I can show you what I was talking about scraping the face grain as opposed to coming up and scraping the top. Stay. And you raise the rest a little more. And that's the easiest part of the bowl to scrape and get a decent surface, is the face grain in the bottom part of the bowl. But that's pretty much the outside of a simple bowl. I can come back and put some detail in with the 3/8 spindle gouge, and I can put some detail on the bottom of the foot and then also the outside. I'll come up, and usually I like to do my detail about 1/3 from the top edge is where I like to do my detail. So I'm going to roll some beads here. So I'm going to come in, pivot the tool down, and then straight, and then in a circle. Maybe do something different with the top portion there. And those beads aren't perfect, but I can go back and refine them. And then I need to take this sharp corner off here. But that's rolling beads. Basically, the tool is going in a circle, moving up and down the tool rest as I go through each bead. So, yeah. And then coming to do the detail for the bottom of the foot. I use a 3/8 spindle gouge to finish off the foot, and I can round the foot. So I'll just shear scrape the side. And I can come back, come in 90, and then rotate the tool slightly to give me a beaded foot that I can round over a little better with sandpaper. And then coming into here, I can shear scrape the side. I don't want to come and make an entry cut directly into the end grain fiber coming out of space here. This entry cut is the hardest cut to do. So I'll come and shear scrape right here to give a place for my bevel to ride so that I can start the cut way easier. A little arcing cut on its side at the end of the cut, and shear scrape out. And that's a little detail on the bottom of the foot. And you can go crazy. You can put as much detail on here as you want. The thing to keep in mind is if you have a really, really pretty piece of wood, you don't want to do too much detail. You want to let the wood do the talking. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I can come back and refine these, but
Yeah, I think
I think that's
great.
good. It's a cool little outside.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Any questions for Dane on the live edge or the outside? That was a nice little bonus of the outside. We'll let
Courtesy
everybody jump in here if they have any questions. Any questions locally? Mike? Bobby? Daniel?
Nothing? Sweet.
Any comments? Mike? Bobby, any comments?
On the bark on your mesquite, if you put CA glue on it, that'll help hold it on.
Absolutely.
Bobby said
And
he
you
put
can totally
CA
do
glue
that.
to hold the bark
you can
on
run
the
a
live.
thin line of CA glue along the top of the edge and the bark. And I've done that before, but I just don't trust it. And for me personally, if I was going to be selling some of my work, it was a piece that was going to be used. If it was an artsy piece, that's totally awesome, and you should do that if you're trying to keep the bark on. Yeah, oh, it's all artsy. It's usable art, of course.
I only do art too, Bobby, so I know what you mean. All right, Dane. Just like last time, you got a lot of great stuff, Dane. Kudos. They like your
Wonderful,
presentation.
thank you. I have a YouTube channel now.
You do? What is it?
Dane_G_wood turning. That's the only name I could come up with. Not very creative.
Dane_G_wood
_wood There's 2
wood
videos
turning.
up. I'm not talking. It was me learning how to edit. I think I did a decent job, but I'm getting there. And if you'll go subscribe to that,
I'm sure you'll get a few subscribers. That'll be good.
Yeah, that'd be
And
incredible.
then what about Instagram or anything? Not yet?
I have an Instagram.
What's your Instagram?
Dane.G_wood turner on Instagram.
Wood Turner.
There's one post
Okay.
up, and I plan on posting a lot more frequently. So.
Yes, awesome. Well, thanks again for coming out. The chat seemed to love you. These guys, I don't know if these guys, anything good or bad? You guys want to give thumbs up, thumbs down? That's
Thank you.
Oh, thumbs up. Okay. JP has a question.
Question.
Have you ever
I've done that
scorched
as
the
well.
outside of the live
I
edge?
have. I love doing that, actually. It's very fun. I also have scorched the entire outsides of bowls. If you have some blanks that are super split, instead of filling them and stuff, I like to just torch them and make them look like ancient and old and things like that.
Like they've been through it.
Yeah, rugged.
Nice.
So yeah.
Well, very cool. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone in the
Thank you so
chat.
much.
Thank you guys for coming out.
Yeah.
Even though
You are my man. Thank you.
you guys talk a lot, and
Number
then you're on
5.
camera, and now you're real quiet. I noticed.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks a
Appreciate
lot.
you
We'll be
coming.
back next week with we're gonna do some resin or some blank casting and turning all in one live stream. That'll be good.
Rad.
Dane, thanks
Rad.
again for coming out.
Absolutely.
We'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be
All
back.
right.
And I'll remember the blank next time.
Yeah, you have a blank you can bring for the next one.
Yeah, this is true.
All right, thanks, everybody. We're taking off. Amy, let me leave the chat.